fire. Everything was aflame, but now came an eerie sound, commingled with the hiss of the burning foam. The battery-powered display smoke detectors were going off, one after another, and the firefighters could hear high-pitched squeals within the flames, like animals burning alive. Captain Ezel yelled at the nozzle man to hit the Celotex ceiling tiles, but the 225-gallon nozzle created so much steam and the superheated air emitted so much nozzle pressure that it blasted the firefighters back out the door. While other engines were still racing to Olay's home center, Ezel ordered a 1 3/4-inch attack line to be brought to another entry, but learned that the fire doors had in fact rolled down and could not be pried open. The captain sent a man up to ventilate the roof, because the fire had not burned through yet. When the firefighter cut the hole, flames shot into the sky, pulling heat with them in a chimney effect, but it was too little, too late. It was about 7 minutes into the fire, and the entire roof was perilously threatened, so Ezel had to order his firefighters back down. And where the hell was Engine 41, he wondered, yelling into the radio? And why did he hear an engine being radio dispatched in the wrong direction? What Captain Ezel did not know at the time was there was another nearly simultaneous fire at Vaughn's Market, only blocks from Olay's home center. He would later say that it was unheard of, 2 South Pasadena fires in close proximity, in retail establishments during business hours, unheard of. It was indeed a bizarre evening for firefighters in that part of the San Gabriel Valley. Prior to the Olay's fire and the fire at Vaughn's Market, there had been a fire in nearby Pasadena at Albertson's Market on the East Sierra Madre Boulevard. About 7 miles from Olay's arson investigator, Scott McClure, had arrived at Albertson's at 6:45 p.m. and met with a battalion chief for quick briefing. McClure had found the point of origin easily enough, in the grocery racks piled high with bags of potato chips. At 7:45 p.m., McClure called dispatch and requested that they send arson investigator John Orr from nearby Glendale Fire Department, probably the most accomplished arson sleuth within the several fire departments that rendered mutual aid in the area. John Orr showed up very quickly, and he explained to McClure about the volatility of potato chips, that the oils of the chips and the bag material are highly combustible, a sack of solid fuel. John Orr told McClure that in his opinion, the Albertsons fire was deliberately set, as is usually the case with fires in retail stores, during business hours when customers are present. When McClure later finished his investigation and returned to his car, he heard radio reports of the disaster that was unfolding 7 miles away at Olay's home center, and he sped towards the scene. When he arrived at Olay's, John Orr was already there. After he ordered his firefighter off the roof of Olay's, and after the interior attack was aborted, Captain Ezel found John Orr standing at the rear of his engine, carrying a 35mm camera. "John, what are you doing here?" Ezel said. "Passing by," John Orr said. "Do you mind if I shoot some pictures?" Ezel wished that Orr had turned gear in his car, but since the arson investigator was in civilian clothes and hadn't offered to help, the fire captain assumed he did not. "Help yourself, I've got work to do," Ezel said. And while Ezel awaited the arrival of engine companies, and while Jim Obden was led to the back of an ambulance, and while Billy Deal stood in front of Olay's home center where he would remain for 22 hours, and while John Orr shot film of the conflagration, the roof caved in, and a geyser of flame and sparks exploded high into the night. In the parking lot of Olay's, the sister-in-law of Carolyn Krause, who was a community service officer for the Glendale Police Department, saw a blue Dodge that belonged to the Glendale Arson Unit, and standing by the car were John Orr and his partner, Police Officer Dennis Wilson. After checking in vain at the triage area for her missing sister-in-law, Karen Krause approached the arson investigators and told them that Carolyn Krause was missing. John Orr told her they would keep an eye out for Carolyn, but that until the fire was suppressed, nobody could get near the building except the firefighters, the implication being that a search for bodies would be hours away. Karen Krause stayed as the rest of the family arrived, and they remained for several hours waiting. The fire chief of South Pasadena was at a fire prevention class in Los Angeles when he learned of the disaster at Olay's. Chief Gene Murray excused himself, jumped in his staff car, and sped to South Pasadena, arriving close to 8:30 p.m. He saw that one of the crews was attempting to breach an exterior wall in order to penetrate it with heavy master stream poles, an appliance that could deliver more than 500 gallons of water per minute. While Chief Murray was assuming command, he learned of the fire in progress at Vaughn's Market on the same street, just a few minutes away. He couldn't believe it. Chief Murray spotted John Orr snapping photos and asked if he would assist by going to Vaughn's to conduct an investigation. It wouldn't be until midnight that the fire chief could declare that 125 firefighters had the Olay's blaze under control. Moments before the smoke was observed in the housewares department, Patricia Parham, the mother of Caroline Krause, had gone to Olay's home center to see her only daughter, Patricia. Parham was with Caroline's two children, her son, age 3, and her 2-year-old daughter. Mrs. Parham picked up her daughter's house keys so that she could take the grandchildren home and put them to bed. Back at Caroline's house, Mrs. Parham received 3 phone calls in quick succession, one from Caroline's father-in-law, one from Caroline's sister-in-law, and one from Caroline's brother. When Mrs. Parham raced back to Olay's parking lot, the building was engulfed, and she never saw her daughter again. Sometime after 8 o'clock p.m., the phone rang in the Cetina residence. Louis, Jimmy's older brother, picked it up, and a family friend said, "How's your brother? Is he home?" She seemed upset, so Louis said, "Why?" And she said, "Because there's a fire where he works." Louis's mother asked him in Spanish what was wrong, but Louis answered, "Nothing." Then he ran out to his car, and he drove to Olay's. Fair Oaks was cordoned off by police cars, so he had a detour and take Orange Grove Avenue, finally parking in a handicap zone near Olay's. He jumped from his car, leaving the lights on and his keys inside, and just started to run until a cop stopped him and said, "You can't leave your car there." Louis turned to him and cried, "My brother works there." The cop hesitated, but let him go. When Louis reached the flaming building, he spotted an employee whose name he couldn't remember, and he yelled, "Where's my brother?" The young man said, "I don't know." Then he added, "I think he might still be in the building." Louis Cetina then ran to the north side of the building and entered an open area, splashing through 4 inches of water where the sprinklers had activated. Another Olay's employee, whom he recognized, was standing there watching, and Louis shouted, "Where's my brother?" The young man said to him, "I saw him a little while ago. He went back inside." "Back inside?" Louis cried. "Yeah, there were people banging on the door. One of those fire doors that dropped down." Then Louis Cetina, not knowing where to run, circled around to the back to the door through which Jim Ogden had escaped. The door was open now, but impassable. Louis returned back the other way to the fire door that had previously served as the main entrance to a thrifty drugstore that formerly occupied a space in the strip mall. Louis stayed right there, where there also used to be a laundromat at which the children would wait, while their mother washed the family's clothes. Their dad would sometimes buy them an ice cream there at Thrifty's when he could afford it. It was 2 o'clock in the morning before he went home to face his mother with the truth. Matthew Troidel was at home with his wife, Kim, and their 5-year-old daughter, Bethany. Matthew William, his 2.5-year-old son, was with his grandparents, and while Matthew Troidel's wife was speaking on the phone, there was an emergency breakthrough on the line. It came from one of her brothers, who said that Billy Deal had called about a fire at Olay's, and that Billy couldn't find Ada and Matthew William. While en route to Olay's, Matthew Troidel and his wife kept reassuring each other that it was probably a small fire, maybe a trash can or dumpster, and that it had just caused some confusion. That's all it was, confusion. But when they arrived, they saw the ventilated roof shooting flames 100 feet in the air, and there were police cars and fire engines and ambulances and chaos. But they managed to find Billy Deal in all that pandemonium, and he told them the worst. Matthew Troidel said later that he had all kinds of crazy thoughts. Maybe they'd gotten out a back door. Maybe they'd been hurt and were already at the hospital. Maybe they crawled up in the air conditioning vent and were okay. Maybe. So many of them kept thinking, maybe. The man designated to lead a 6-man investigative team the next morning was Sergeant Jack Palmer, a 25-year law enforcement veteran assigned to Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, arson and explosive detail. He had investigated nearly 5,000 fires in his 12 years as an arson cop and had the resources of the County of Los Angeles on which to draw. The tiny South Pasadena Fire Department needed vast assistance for this major disaster, and the LASD, in their green jumpsuits, the Lean Green Machine, were there in force. Sergeant Palmer immediately did his walk-around of the ravaged structure, looking for the fire's point of origin. The west portion of Olay's was destroyed, and the east side showed heat and water damage from the sprinklers that had gone off. Skip loaders and bulldozers were already moving debris, while the investigators, armed with shovels and wheelbarrows, tried to find the bodies of the 4 missing victims. Each time a skip loader would snare a load, investigators had to look inside for remnants of charred human beings. Sergeant Palmer saw the crane remove twisted steel beams from the center of the building where the roof had collapsed and talked with an employee who had been called to the scene. Palmer was told that plastic products had been on display, but he was not told that there were racks full of polyurethane foam products, which he would later say go like wildfires. After his hour-and-a-half investigation, the arson cop decided that he was unable to eliminate as a fire caused the possibility of electrical short in the attic area. He later said that this fire was very hard to read because there was so much potential fuel in the store, and that overhead burning, which caused ceiling material to drop and start secondary fires, could have ignited numerous hotspots. Jim Obden was interviewed by Sergeant Palmer, and he did tell the investigator that he'd observed a column of dark smoke nearly 2 feet in diameter in the southeast part of the store by the housewares section. But Palmer never interviewed Anthony Colantano, the employee who had seen not only smoke in that area, but fire burning in the racks, an amazingly fast fire that chased him and created a draft of its own, blowing him out the door. An employee, James Cooler, later said that he had only 30 feet from the southwest fire door when the starting point of the fire was still the entire length of the store away. Yet, he had barely escaped without injury. The fire was on him just that fast. He was not interviewed. But Sergeant Palmer did learn that there were 2 other retail store fires in the area on that terrible evening, and they had both been deemed arson fires. But Palmer decided that since they were set in potato chip racks and not polyfoam, they were probably unconnected to Olay's blaze. Soon, in the northern portion of the ruined building, far from where Jim Obden and Anthony Colantano had seen the first column of smoke, searchers found human remains. Another fire investigator who arrived on the scene at 7 a.m. was a supervisor with the arson bomb unit of the California State Fire Marshal's Office, where he'd worked for 16 years. Jim Allen, like any arson investigator, was looking for signs of the fire's direction. Normally, fire moves up through a heat transfer process and as it hits a surface, a wall, a ceiling, it follows the path of least resistance, spreading out in a V pattern upward and outward. The V or convex pattern reveals the point of origin in simple fire, but the Olay's disaster had not been simple. Allen noted that it was in the center of a building that the roof had collapsed. In addition, after temperatures in the location reached 160 degrees and melted the door's fusible links, both north and south steel-fired doors had rolled down as they were designed to do. The assumption was that a major fire would occur after hours when no one was in the store, but the speed and heat of the fire had been astonishing, and those doors had sealed egress quickly, very quickly. Allen stayed about 7 hours, a lot longer than Sergeant Palmer, and after 3 or 4 of the aisles had been dug out, he prowled through the southeast corner with John Orr, a friend and a colleague, who had also arrived on the scene. Jim Allen was of the opinion that the investigation, like the fire, was moving too fast. This fire had caught up with the people trying to outrun it, so there had to have been a large load of fuel. Of course, he knew that polyurethane foam is a hydrocarbon fuel that comes from a petroleum product with the burn characteristics of petroleum, but he did not learn of its presence, not that day. Allen didn't like the speed with which Sergeant Palmer's conclusions were being offered, and he said so to John Orr, but his colleague failed to tell Allen that there had been 2 other retail store fires in the area the night before, and he never mentioned that he had been at the scene of one of them to consult, and was the official investigator on the other. 3 such fires might indicate an arson series, and play a significant role in determining the nature of Olay's fire. During the afternoon, Jim Allen, John Orr, and other arson investigators were ordered out of the area by a tall Sheriff's Department lieutenant who said, "We're going into body recovery now." When Allen protested, the tall lieutenant said, "You can leave or run the risk of being arrested for interfering." In addition to never learning about the polyfoam in the southeast quadrant of the building, Allen was curtailed by the LASD investigators, who said that all witnesses would be interviewed by them. At a meeting that took place there in Olay's shopping center at Winchell's Donut Shop, Sergeant Palmer said to the huddle of fire investigators, "I can't eliminate an electrical problem in the concealed space between the false ceiling and the roof." "We haven't come up with a point of origin," Jim Allen offered. "Let's keep going." "We should be unified with our conclusion," Sergeant Palmer said. But Allen replied, "I'm writing up my report that it's an undetermined fire. I don't know for sure if it started in the attic or where it started." Ultimately, Palmer believed it had been a drop-down attic fire, probably caused by faulty electrical wiring. There was no spirited debate. The dozen or so arson investigators who had shoveled through the debris and watched the recovery of 4 bodies ate their Winchell's donuts, drank their coffee, and by their silence acquiesced to Sergeant Jack Palmer's conclusion. In order to understand the compliance of so many trained arson specialists at the fire scene, one must understand the hierarchy and the class structure that divides the profession. First, there are arson investigators who have been drawn from the firefighting ranks. Although they have peace officer status, carrying firearms, and effect the arrests of fire-setting criminals, they are, and always will be, to the other class, just gun-toting firemen, who, if they depart from arson investigation, will go back to the firehouse, to scrub fire hose and polish chrome. The other arson investigators, those who come from the ranks of the police service, are first and foremost cops. They are law enforcement officers assigned to arson investigation and will be law enforcement officers after leaving the arson ranks. Their canine symbol is the German Shepherd police dog, the true descendant of the wolf, not some white and black bag of spots that chases a fire truck. Also, Sergeant Jack Palmer was not a cop from a town like South Pasadena or any of the other little cities that make up the foothills areas and the San Gabriel Valley. He was with an agency that numbered in the thousands, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, which along with the Los Angeles Police Department was one of the major police entities in California. The Lean Green Machine sometimes was called by critics the Mean Green Machine. Fire investigator Jim Allen, who had early in his adult life been a San Joaquin deputy sheriff, knew who wins in a pissing contest between cops and firemen. So, when Sergeant Palmer essentially called it an accidental fire, there was not much argument. In fact, people never did speak publicly of their differing opinions, not for a long time. They all knew who the big dog was. John Orr was especially angered by Sergeant Palmer's meeting and placed a call late that morning to Dennis Foote, a fellow arson investigator for the City of Los Angeles Fire Department. He asked Foote if he or some other member of the mutual aid force, the Foothill Arson Task Force Group, could respond to assist with the Olays inquiry. John Orr also wanted to see a file that Foote had been compiling, a file dealing with a fire series that had been occurring in Los Angeles and the vicinity for about 4 years. Some of those fires involved the ignition of potato chips. Others involved combustible materials such as polyfoam. What they had in common was their occurrence in retail establishments during business hours, usually in the afternoon or early evening. On one of those investigations, Dennis Foote had collected a delay device that was different from most cigarette matchbook devices. This one, or what was left of it, was a Marlboro cigarette with 3 paper matches attached to it by a rubber band. Such a device provided up to 15 minutes or more for an arsonist to leave a store before the burning cigarette ignited the matches, which in turn ignited flammable material around them. When Foote arrived at Olays, Orrs told him that there had been other fires in that area that night before, and that possibly a delay device had been used to start them. Dennis Foote put on his helmet and his rubber boots and entered Olays with Orr, but that area of the building was just about totally destroyed, and the sheriff's investigators were already finishing up. Before he left, Foote gave his file, he called it the potato chip file, to John Orr. Then a few days later, a peculiar thing happened. A fire erupted in Builders Emporium in North Hollywood. It was in the polyfoam section, like so many of the others. Foote wanted another look at Olays, another chance to determine if the Olays fire could have been ignited in polyfoam products that burn violently. But it was too late. A wrecking company had cleared almost all debris from the building space.